Jordan Peterson.
Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
I'm not anti-feminist.
Jordan Peterson, hero or villain?
Why should you have the right to do that?
Jordan Peterson has been described as a polarizing and divisive provocateur. Some call him a troll,
Put their claws in the air and click like this.
a narcissist,
The psychopath who will be narcissistic.
or a pseudo-intellectual whose theories lack merit or even sense. But others have praised him for standing up to snowflakes and to social justice warriors and put him forward as a potential hero in the culture wars between left and right. Many simply say he saved their lives. Here's everything you need to know about how this obscure psychologist became a phenomenon, what brought him down, and what he's planning to do next. Into the limelight. Peterson's career began with a PhD in psychology, which he received from Canada's prestigious McGill University in 1991. With it, he spent 2 years treating patients in McGill's hospital before becoming a professor, lecturing and conducting research at Harvard and then the University of Toronto. After initially focusing on alcoholism, he moved on to the subject of personality and became highly regarded in the field. He co-authored over 100 publications, and his work has been cited more than 10,000 times. He also published a book, Maps of Meaning, a 600-page multidisciplinary hypothesis about human nature. However, neither his book nor his academic success made Peterson a media sensation and household name. Instead, it was a series of YouTube videos entitled Professor Against Political Correctness that propelled him to fame. He published the videos in September 2016 in response to Bill C-16, which had been introduced in May of that year. The purpose of it was to add gender expression and gender identity as protected grounds to the Canadian Human Rights Act and criminal code dealing with hate speech. Peterson strongly objected, claiming that forcing everyone to use people's preferred pronouns was a dire threat to free speech. If it came into force, he said he'd refuse to refer to transgender people by their preferred pronouns, which would likely lead to criminal charges for him and others who shared this view, stating, "If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up of radical left-wing ideologues." This type of statement usually generates public fury, cancellation, and a swift apology and withdrawal. But Peterson's delivery, academic background, and outright refusal to back down struck a chord. Of course, it also made many angry, and he was confronted by protesters and called in for numerous TV interviews. But each time he was challenged on camera, his ability to fight back calmly and academically just gained him more supporters. Since 2013, he'd been posting videos of his lectures online and had set up a Patreon account asking for a little extra cash to help him improve the quality of future content. Pre-2016, it had been bringing in $1,000 a month. By May 2018, it had skyrocketed to $80,000 a month, and he was able to hire a production crew to broadcast his lectures and started hosting live Q&A sessions with his new fans. The 12 Rules for Life. In 2018, Peterson published his second book, 12 Rules for Life. And unlike Maps of Meaning, it hit society at just the right time. Less inaccessible academic textbook and more modern-day self-help, the 12 Rules of Life captivated its readers, particularly young men, and prompted many into self-improvement. To his critics, the rules were obvious and simplistic. Clean your room, stand up straight with your shoulders back, and pet a cat if you meet one. None of this was groundbreaking, and many deemed it unworthy of the accolades it received. However, it wasn't the rules but the delivery that inspired people. Numerous self-help books will tell you that your feelings are not your fault, that you should treat yourself with kindness, and if you can manage it, take a small step each day, like, for example, cleaning a room. Peterson gave the exact same advice, but in a more brutal way. He told people that they were not as good as they could be. Life is full of suffering, and there is no avoiding it. But you can make things slightly better by cleaning up. This established him as a tough love father figure, and he became a male role model for many who needed one. The 12 Rules rocketed to the #1 spot on Amazon with an almost perfect record of 5-star reviews. These flooded in from young men who claimed that Peterson had changed not only their lives, but also their whole outlook on the world.
Personally, I would rate this book a 3 out of 5. Like I said, it's a thick and dense book.
The New Yorker called him one of the most influential and polarizing public intellectuals in the English-speaking world. And The Guardian claimed he was fast becoming the closest that academia has to a rock star. The Crisis of Masculinity. With his new platform, he began spreading the word about one of his biggest concerns, which he calls the crisis of masculinity.
They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking.
He claims that the masculine spirit is currently under assault, and argues against the view that our societal hierarchy is an oppressive patriarchy designed to disadvantage women and elevate men. Instead, he says that men are in positions of power based on competence and traits that make them suitable for promotion. By painting men as the enemy and forcing them to adopt feminine traits, we're causing a generation of males to become angry, violent, and depressed. Plus, dominance hierarchies in societies are nothing new. In fact, he explains, they're older than trees. To back up this claim, he gives lobsters as an example, whom we genetically diverged from 350 million years ago.
These creatures engage in dominance disputes, and I think dominance is the right way to think about it, because lobsters aren't very empathic and they're not very social, and so it really is the toughest lobster that wins. And what's so cool about the lobster is that when a lobster wins, he flexes and gets bigger, so he looks bigger, because he's a winner. It's like he's advertising that. And
they, just like us, live in a hierarchy built on male aggression and dominance. Therefore, our societal structure isn't some Western phenomenon. It's actually entirely natural and therefore good. He also weighed in on the gender pay gap and explained that although there is some overlap, there are vast differences in the personalities of men and women. This means that given free rein, women will naturally sort themselves into more feminine and lower-paying careers. As evidence, he cited that the Scandinavian countries, which have taken the greatest strides in the fight for gender equality, still have more female nurses and more male engineers. This, he said, proved that the gender pay gap wasn't down to discrimination towards women, and forcing them into high-flying careers they don't really want would be detrimental to them. Of course, not everyone was a fan of his viewpoints.
Excuse me, what does it mean? Does it mean that Scandinavian men and women having more difficulties meeting each other, talking to each other than other people?
Biologists were quick to point out that his lobster argument was a naturalistic fallacy, meaning that just because something occurs in nature doesn't mean it's good. Eating mates or offspring, for example, is not something many would encourage. Feminist campaigners who've been fighting to close the 9% gap in women's pay were also furious, pointing out that many of the stats he uses to back up his claims were false. For example, in one interview, he stated that the majority of physicians are now women.
There are more female physicians than there are male physicians. There are lots of disciplines that are absolutely dominated by women. Many disciplines, and they're doing great.
This is completely wrong for the US, UK, and Canada, where only around 30% of doctors are female. Finally, women picked up on the fact that they were shown in a negative light in all of Peterson's work. He frequently associated the female with chaos and the male with order. He gave interviews in which he said he was uncomfortable confronting crazy women as he was forbidden from dealing with them physically. And he also said that women have to stand up against their crazy sisters as the man-hating brings disgrace to them as a gender. But these criticisms rarely bothered him. As he explained to podcast host Joe,
the thing that I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to because it's just so goddamn funny. I can't help but say it. I figured out how to monetize social justice warriors.
That is what it is.
I know, it's so funny. I just can't believe it.
The other way.
It just, every time I think that, well, it's just one of the surreal circumstances that characterize my life. It's like I'm driving the social justice activists in Canada mad because if they let me speak, then I get to speak, and then more people support me on Patreon. It's like, that's annoying. It's like, goddamn capitalist, he's making more money off this ideological warfare. It's like, okay, fine, let's go protest him. So they go protest me, and then that goes up on YouTube, and then my Patreon account goes way up. So it's like, They don't know what to do. And so one of the things they keep accusing me of, they keep accusing me of like hauling in the loot. And I think, well, look, here's the situation, guys. I give away everything I do online for free. It's free.
The infamous Cathy Newman interview. The anger many of his statements drummed up led him to participate in the now infamous Cathy Newman interview for Channel 4 News. The aim was to put him on the spot for his anti-trans and anti-women views. However, it all went wrong for Channel 4. Peterson responded to every question calmly and with humor. Frustrated, Newman began putting words in his mouth and claiming he'd made statements he never made. For example, at one point he described the traits that predict success in the workplace and listed intelligence and conscientiousness as having a positive effect and agreeableness, which is more common in females, as having a negative effect. Newman responded, "So you're saying that women aren't intelligent enough to run top companies?" Which was nothing like what he'd said. This pattern continued throughout the interview, but each time he remained calm and composed. The most jaw-dropping moment came when she questioned him about his refusal to use people's preferred pronouns, asking why his right to freedom of speech trumped a trans person's right not to be offended. He replied that in order to think, you have to risk being offensive, and pointed out that she certainly wasn't afraid of offending him. In fact, it was a necessary part of her job. This response left her totally lost for words and caused an uncomfortable silence, which Peterson broke with his now infamous, "Ah, gotcha." After the broadcast, his fans were elated with his performance and furious at Newman. They took to every social media platform to criticize her, call her vile names, and even threatened to find where she lived and execute her. Peterson, on the other hand, was at the top of his game. But it wouldn't be long before he'd experience the worst suffering of his life. Brought down by Benzos. In 2019, Peterson was at the height of his fame and fortune. However, all was about to come crashing down. He'd been prescribed the benzodiazepine clonazepam to help him deal with anxiety. Then in 2019, his wife was diagnosed with kidney cancer and his doctor increased the dose. Unfortunately for Peterson, it didn't agree with him and he began to suffer from akathisia, a condition where a sedative makes the user restless rather than calm. This can cause excessive fidgeting and leave patients unable to function. He decided to stop taking the drug cold turkey. This was an extremely dangerous thing to attempt, as benzo withdrawal should be done slowly over a series of months. Trying to detox too fast can lead to seizures, along with a number of other horrific side effects. Peterson was now trapped. He couldn't detox, but he also couldn't tolerate the drug any longer. U.S. facilities wanted him to withdraw too slowly. In an act of desperation, his family took him to an emergency detox facility in Russia. There, they discovered he was suffering from severe pneumonia and was barely hanging on. They put him in a medically induced coma for 8 days, and he spent the next 4 weeks in the ICU. Miraculously, he pulled through, although, according to his family, he suffered severe psychological damage, temporarily lost motor skills, and is lucky to be alive. For many celebrities, a stint in rehab is no big deal, especially for a legally prescribed drug dependence. But for Peterson, the self on how to take control of your life, it blew a massive hole in his reputation. Although he didn't lose his whole following, it did introduce doubt. He'd fallen from the pedestal and revealed that he might not be as intellectually superior as many had believed. Twitter chaos. After his recovery, Peterson returned to social media and published his third book, Beyond Order: 12 More Rules for Life. Unfortunately, many viewed it as a rehashing of his past success, which introduced nothing new. Quickly, he saw his brand transform from that of a self-help guru to a polarizing provocateur who had to maintain relevance with his appearances and social media posts. Appearing on Joe Rogan's podcast again, he claimed that he's very skeptical of the models that are used to predict climate change, and that you can't trust the data because too much ideology is involved. He also released a series of videos entitled "The World Is Not Ending," "Unsettled," "Climate and Science," and "The Great Climate Con." In response, climate scientists accused him of being stunningly ignorant and confused about the difference between weather forecasting and climate modeling. True to style, when faced with criticism, Peterson doubled down, claiming that carbon dioxide is beneficial to the world and began a campaign for automotive freedom, fighting fearsomely against any government that enforces a move towards electric vehicles. Then, in May 2022, he decided to weigh in on the body-positive movement by commenting on Sports Illustrated's plus-size cover model. He tweeted, "Sorry, not beautiful, and no amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that." Finally, in the summer of 2022, he landed himself in hot water again, this time for a tweet that misgendered and dead-named transgender actor Elliot Page. Twitter decided to suspend his account until he deleted the tweet. But Peterson refused, saying he'd rather die than withdraw it. This resulted in a Twitter ban that lasted until Elon Musk took over and reinstated his account in November 2022. The future for Peterson. These days, Peterson receives more hate than praise, and it seems to affect him more than it used to. In September 2022, director Olivia Wilde claimed she'd based her lead character on this insane man, Jordan Peterson, who is this pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community. She described incels, or involuntary celibates, as disenfranchised, mostly white men who believe they are entitled to sex from women. In the past, Peterson had referred to this particular group as useless men, despite the fact that he does have many fans among them. And he was able to brush off Wilde's comments, claiming to be flattered that she'd chosen Chris Pine to portray him. However, in a later interview with Piers Morgan, Morgan described incels as weirdo, loner men who are despicable in many ways. And Peterson broke down. Not for himself, but for yet another attack on the people he described as disaffected, alienated, and lonesome, saying that they need support, encouragement, and a voice. He argued that throwing insults at them will only alienate them further. Someone has to help these men, so why not him? And this is why, despite Peterson's numerous missteps, false statements, and controversy, he's maintained a solid core of supporters who continue to be grateful to him for the positive impact he's had on their lives. So, what's next for Peterson? For a while, it looked as though he intended to stay relevant by being provocative and picking fights on Twitter. However, he's now partnered with UK Brexiteer Sir Paul Marshall and global firm Legatum to launch the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, or ARC. Their goal is to provide an alternative vision of the future, as opposed to what he calls the apocalyptic narrative pushed forward by organizations like the WEF. They intend to develop solutions for our social, economic, and cultural problems that don't involve governments compelling their people to do things that will plunge them further into poverty. What this looks like in practice is still unclear, but one thing's for sure, we haven't heard the last from Peterson.